of transporting this drill down the road is lockout hubs. They're right here. They're in the lockout position. You just pull this, turn it, and as that tire turns, it will engage. Make sure it is locked out when you're roading it. If you're not using the native grass box, leave this locked out. That way, none of the native grass system is turning. Very important to make sure when you're done and you're roading it to lock those hubs up. There's a lockout hub on both sides because we're driving the main box and small seats box off of that tire. We're driving the native grass box on this tire. So, and that can get expensive if you leave that locked in because everything's turning.
The native grass box, a lot of the older Great Plains drills, I guess the seed binds up in mechanism to really drop it out. What kind of technology is used on this?
This is the Series 2. You're talking about the Series 1 native grass box. We did away with the Series 1, went to Series 2. We're not having any issues with that.
They got like an agitator in it or
Yes,
something
it's
like
got,
that?
yep, it's got a huge agitator in there. We do recommend that if you're roading this, don't load it in the native grass box or the main box. Because that seed will sit there and that fluffy seed becomes concrete. And then you drop it to the ground and we're gonna break something.
The other thing you want to make sure on is understanding what seed actually goes into what box, because a lot of people think that if it's a native grass, it automatically goes in the native grass box. But really, native grass stands for anything that has any sort of bearded, fluffy, trash type residue. We've got a couple examples here to kind of show you what is really intended to go in there. Because if any seed has the ability to flow through that native box, you really want to be in the main box. So just be conscious of what seed you're actually putting in the box, just to make sure it's kind of in the right one. Or if there's any doubts.
Any doubts, what I do is I take a little handful of seed and I'll drop it over the wheel. If you got seed on the ground, you're in the wrong box. Put it in the main box. The first thing you're gonna do is fill it with your native grass seed, and you're gonna go 200 feet, and it's gonna be in, because it's just gold. Because what we use in that native grass box, we don't use, this is the meter in the main box, this is the meter in the small seeds box, and this is the wheel.
Gotcha.
There is no meter in that native grass box because we're trying to plant this seed. You're not gonna plant this seed. This is a good example of a fluffy seed. This is actually off a cottonwood tree. It's a good example of a light fluffy seed.
Because really, it's pulling that seed through. It's not.
Yeah, those fingers are just pulling that seed.
So can you put straight Garrison grass in there and pull it through?
I haven't seen,
It's fluffy.
is it real fluffy?
Yeah.
It's 50 pounds.
Yeah, you're gonna probably go in the native grass.
Speculate with it or something like that.
Not typically, unless it calls for it, but because your native seed box is kind of a gear meter, you don't really need that lubrication like you would. But typically your graphite is still going to be beneficial if you're trying to reduce your static electricity, stop it from kind of clogging and binding up. If you're worried about moisture, your graphite helps too.
I've got a seed here. This is a dry pasture mix, and it's got graphite on it. And it goes in the main box. You put that in the main box because it flows a lot better. Now we'll walk around, the colders in the front, they're gonna cut the track, they're gonna work what we call fluff and plant. We're gonna work a strip about that wide. We want that colder to run no deeper than the open, no deeper than where you want your seat. So, and there's an adjustment on that, adjustment over here to adjust the colder. So your colder depth is kind of hidden. There's a decal right here that tells you how to what your turns are. There's a little black knob right here, and that's going to set your colder depth. I think it's a 9/16 socket, extension, and a ratchet. You'll get a lot better using the ratchet than trying to turn that black knob. Your hands are doing it. So that's gonna adjust your colder depth. All the way down, the machine's set level, set it factory sets all that from the factory. So all you gotta do is worry about your depth here. No deeper than you want to plant.
And so when he talks about the depth stop there, remember that's just for your coulters. We still have, with our closing wheels, we use our press wheels to set the seed depth. So just remember that they're two different setting adjustments. So a lot of times guys kind of skip over that, thinking that if they're setting one, they're setting both of them, but they are independently adjustable. So.
This is the weight brackets that I spoke about. If you can't get in the ground just with the weight of the drill, your weight brackets up here, universal. Any tractor weight will set in here. So, and you can put 4 here and 4 there, up to 800 pounds.
So you just weight it up until you get the right depth with your coulter.
If you can't get it in the ground.
There's no cylinder holding anything down.
Nope. No cylinder.
So you would know you need to start adding weights because your cylinder would stop early and your tires wouldn't be fully seated on the ground because it's basically stopping you early. If you put all the weights on it.
Tires come out of the ground. Tires above the ground, they need weight.
Yep.
You're gonna quit planting all of a sudden.
Yep. Because this is a contact drive with 2 tires.
And to be up front right now, so it's guys can usually tell what kind of soils they're going into, whether they'll need the weights or not. If you're gonna be going into sand, soft, anything soft, you know you won't. If you're going into anything hard, then yeah, you're gonna need weights. So it's not usually pretty hard to figure out if you need the weights or not.
So, once you get the colder depth set, then you go to the back of the machine and set your seat depth off your T-handle on your press wheel. And those are 1/8 of an inch increments all the way through there. You can stagger them. It doesn't have, that T-handle does not have to be straight across. You can stagger them and get 1/8 inch increments out of that T-handle. So, the nice thing about our opener, these are 13.5 inch blades. We do have a leading edge blade to help cut. So, and then all of our everything coming out of the main box, our seed tube drops it right at the bottom of the furrow.
There's no drop neck kind of at the bolt that you see on a lot of drills.
All-
It's hard to visualize with the blade still on there, but that seed tube on this drill is essentially like you'd see on a planter where it's going all the way down. It's got the seed flap in the back to help protect it as well, so that's kind of, this drill's really, it's kind of why it's built. Its reputation is because making sure that you do have the best emergence or giving that seed the best possible chance, so.
That's where we get our even emergence and stand, is off that seed tube. We're dropping at the bottom. Most everybody else is dropping at what we call the nut bar. So that seed's free falling for 5 to 6 inches. And ours doesn't. It stays right in that seed tube and goes right to the bottom of the furrow.
Don't back up. Oh,
No, yeah, what do you have?
I said, don't back up.
Oh, I mean, that's.
Yeah. Yeah, don't back.
Yeah, but if you're renting this to people with 5 acres, they don't know nothing. I put people in tractors and watch Harold teeth go bing, 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 bing. So.
What's gonna
might
happen
mention
if you do
Yeah,
back
just
up, if
saying.
you're in wet soil, you're gonna plug that seed tube.
Does
Yeah,
it, does
pick
it
it all
come
up.
up, does it come out the truck road or someplace where you can see it?
Yeah, once that's plugged and that seed tube fill, or the seed tube, and then our seed hose fills, then you're gonna start seeing seed spill out the back of the meter.
Just like any grain, you know.
Yeah, yeah,
What I'm saying is you better tell people that when you rent it to them right off, cause
yeah.
don't assume anybody knows anything. I'm just saying, you better tell them.
The plan is that either me or Kathy will go, or one of our board members will go out and help the person calibrate it, because you will calibrate yourself, but we will be there to assist. And then
So-
also explain that kind of thing, like the basics of don't do this, don't do that.
Just cause they own a tractor and land doesn't mean. they know how to
Exactly,
farm it.
exactly.
It's pretty simple to calibrate. We'll walk through it real quick. It's got a four-speed gearbox on the main box, small seeds box. Got the same gearbox on the native grass. So I always say, starting one, book's gonna tell you to turn this crank 411 for 1 acre.
Yeah, for 1 acre.
For 1 acre. We're not gonna do that. We're gonna do 1/10 of an acre. So we're gonna crank this 41 times. And I explained to them this morning, a couple of the board members, I've got little tin buckets that I set under 3 openers. And then we crank the handle 41 revolutions. And then we weigh our seed. Postal scale, cause we're in ounces. We're gonna convert that to pounds, then we're gonna convert it across the drill to see how much each, we're gonna see how many pounds per opener we're dropping, and then we're gonna take that times the opener. They will have my formula. It's pretty accurate. So, kinda, it's simple. You're gonna calibrate 2 or 3 times, especially in a mix that we don't have a starting point for. We're just gonna randomly adjust that adjusts the gates right there, and we're just gonna pick a spot where we think we're good. We're gonna calibrate, and at 41 revolutions, we're gonna calibrate that more than once. If you had to crank this 411 times, once is enough.
Because also what's nice about these drills is because we've got our gearboxes and we've got a slide gate that's basically a scale from 0 to 100. After you calibrate it that 1 or 2 times, no matter what you did for those previous calibrations, as long as you know how many pounds you're putting out per revolution, the manual pretty much gives you a calibration to then find your new set factor. So there's not, kind of, as long as you understand that process, there's really not a lot of fighting it. You just kind of have to, it's one of those things where you just have to do the work ahead of time to know it is right. Because once you get into our manuals, you will notice that every seed chart lists the seed pounds or seeds per pound. But just keep in mind that where that book was made and the seed they used versus the year, and the condition isn't always gonna be the same, so that's why we like to say our calibration charts are a starting point, and a calibration is to kind of dial that in. Because a lot of times guys will set it and go and just assume it's right. That's really why we have to recommend and put that emphasis on the calibration, because it's not fun to get calls back of kind of blowing through seeds.
Seed is not cheap. We want it right. We can dial it in. We can dial this drill in to get you right where you need to be. So the reason I say for the main box, small seeds box, start in gear 1. When you calibrate, or half of what you want to put on, shift it to 2. That doubles your rate. So usually I'll shift to 2. If we're at 50% of what we want, I'll shift to 2 and then calibrate again, and we're right there.
What about your seed indicator there? It says full and empty, I assume. Which box is that measuring? Your main box?
Yes, this is measuring what's in the main box. It's just a foam float in there.
Gas tank. The gas tank.
Pretty much, yeah.
Yes, gauge.
You open that up, it looks like your toilet bowl.
Sure beats getting out every 2 minutes.
But keep in mind, that is only for your main seed. And a lot of times with small seeds, especially at higher rates, you tend to go through your small seed box a lot quicker. You know, earlier we talked about the importance of putting the right seed in the right box. But we also want to let you know that if you're doing a small seed at a higher rate, you can still use the main box. You just want to make sure you're above that 12 pounds. Because if you go and look, we have both of our meters sitting on the table, and if you look at them, they're pretty much just scaled up versions of themselves. So if a guy's doing solely a small seed and doesn't want to be refilling the small box every couple acres, he can run it through the main box just as accurately.
Take for alfalfa, for instance. If you're not putting down a nurse crop, cover crop, you're just solely doing alfalfa. If you're at 12 pounds and above, don't mess with that small seed box, put it in the main box and go. That way you're not stopping and filling a lot. And then we can be accurate in the main box.
So the other thing I really want to hit on while we're up here, because a lot of guys forget about this, and this is very important. So it's kind of hard to see with it sitting the way it is, but you can imagine when this drill is picked all the way up, this box will pick up another 1.5 feet or so you have a really high pitch to your tongue. And when you think about that, that is not going to be good on your hitch pin and your drawbar. So that's where this comes in. This bolts to the drawbar of your tractor, and you basically have the swivel yoke bolted to the drill itself. Gives the drill kind of full range of motion, and it also eliminates all that kind of banging up and down, back and forth from kind of just a regular hitch pin. So just don't forget about this, because it'll either eat your pin up or kind of
Bend it, and you
Yeah.
can't get it out.
Somebody will have to do maintenance.
So on the native grass box, it's gonna drive off to that side over there. And there is no slide, so what we're doing is we're counting revolutions. So there's a series of sprockets over there on the end that we can either go up or down accordingly, and we wanna change the sprocket back here on the shaft going through. Now, when you get to really low seeds, low pounds per acre, and you can't get there in one, they have a gear reduction kit. Should have had a gear reduction kit in a black box. It's a chunk of change and 2 sprockets, and we can change the sprocket here and here, and that will reduce the revolutions of that shaft without changing the sprocket, a whole lot of sprockets. Just keep in mind, we're not doing any slide gates in that native grass box.
I'm really
Had
changing.
all international good straight years ago. Had all them years. You better get right.
And with the native grasses, it's gonna be far more forgiving as far as your selection. And also our books do a really good job. As long, if you calibrate the native grass box once, it'll tell you how many pounds you put out per revolution. And after you know how many pounds you put out per revolution, you know, it pretty much tells you how fast you need to have it. So it's just, like I said, it's just a matter of understanding what the
And
maintenance stone.
the nice thing about all of our sprockets, they're stamped. You don't have to count each tooth, they're all stamped. All these sprockets are stamped.
Let's take a crank from that side, go over and start.
Yes. Yep, one crank, so you calibrate in the native grass, bring your crank over here, put it on, calibrate.
41 cranks.
Yes. Same revolutions.
So I guess there's two other things I kinda wanna hit on while we're up here. So on each drive for each gearbox, you're gonna have pretty much a clutch here, kind of a jaw clutch, and that's gonna set when your drives gauge and disengage. So usually a lot of times the first time it gets set, that's usually good enough. But a lot of times guys like to set them to trickle on their end rows when they're, that way they can pick it up and turn and still trickle, or if they want to turn off earlier or later, kind of up to them. But the other thing about them is that they are greasable, so you don't want to pump them full of grease, but you do want to grease them. The big thing you do not want to over grease is your coulter banks. They really don't take a whole lot of grease, but then you do want to keep your main shaft up here well greased as well. So when it came to daily operation, I would pretty much say it would be your main greasers here, and then that would be a weekly.
Yeah, probably weekly on your colders. That's all lube lines going down to the colders, so you're not crawling around underneath there doing each one.
Are your gearboxes oil filled?
Yes.
How do you go about servicing those kinds of?
To be honest, we've been making these grills for how long, and it's not something any end user will really run into, especially in this kind of scenario. But
That's why the question is, we have a 1989 and we've never figured out how to put oil in it.
You're good, Joe. You're good. Until you see something leaking in that gearbox, I wouldn't worry about it. I've only seen one gearbox, one of these gearboxes tore up. It's because that lockout wasn't unlocked
When you went
in
down the road.
transport. And that baby really gets to spinning.
because really the stuff we talk about today is about kind of setting first time in the field, getting familiar and used to it. But in most scenarios, as long as you understand those three things, those few things, then it's relatively problem free after that. As long as you don't treat it like a race car.
What's your toe speed? Is it marked on there? What are you supposed to tow it down the road, even with it locked out?
Oh, I'd go off the tire recommendations.
According to the manual, it's 35 miles per hour. And we go about 25 because it likes to bounce.
And I told her to speed up.
Smooth out.
Yeah.
About 60 to go.
Yeah.
Smooth.
And driving wise, it is sincerely yellow line to white line. So that's why we're looking into the trailer for.
Probably doesn't handle the linear post very well.
Oh, yeah, that was fun. I actually only wheel down the road, one of the airports, just right where.
This does have lights on it.
Yeah.
And the mark tag.
The other, one thing I would suggest, with the light plug,
Getting an adapter.
get an
Truck?
adapter
Yeah.
for your pickups. So you can run the lights.
Moving in on the back.
Yes, we do. It's already back there.
You see,
It came, but.
But you put it on.
Okay, thank you. Can I see that?
They're thinking about getting a trailer,
Well, you run it sideways on the trailer.
So it's gonna be a
just backing
Donahue.
up on the trailer. The nice thing about this, nice thing about our drills is it's got a folding tongue. Pull two bolts out here and the tongue will slide right.
So the trailer we're looking at is a Donahue implement trailer. So essentially it's, well, the wheelbase, you can pull away from the wheelbase so it lays flat on the ground so you can just drive onto it and or back onto it and then lower it and hook and move the tongue over.
And once you set the drill down on the trailer, this is gonna be really light here to do that.